Well, good morning and thank you for coming. Energy prices have become a national crisis. We've got a real emergency on our hands when it comes to energy prices in this country. This is a graph of the red line shows the consumer price index since 1980. It's gone up 4 times compared with 1980. Power prices, though, have gone up 8-fold since 1980. And you'll notice the significant rise in 2006 onwards. That is due to renewable energy, what we know as intermittent energy. This is what's causing our national crisis. We have the repercussions with families paying huge bills, and under Finkel could go to another almost $800 above what we're paying now. In addition, we see small businesses being decimated. Senator Pauline Hanson was in central Queensland last week, and she saw a fish and chip shop business that is now paying around about $60,000 per year for electricity. Ridiculous. We have a bowling alley operator in southern Queensland who contacted me and said his power bill has doubled. We have people out in Mitchell in western Queensland, small country town, and the electricity bill for the local cafe is skyrocketing simply because of refrigeration needing electricity. And we need to do something about it. The only party that is capable of providing cheap energy is Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. And rather than continue on this road to deindustrialisation, we need to stop, understand the causes of that deindustrialisation, and then get onto the path of reindustrialisation. And to do that, I read the Finkel report, and I've digested this, and it is a disgrace. I was so alarmed that I contacted a noted internationally renowned economist, Dr. Alan Moran, and asked him to review the Finkel report, or the Finkel review, and give me his recommendations. And so without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Alan Moran.
Thanks very much. Yeah, well, having looked at the Finkel report and looked at its, the report that's behind much of its mechanics, which is the report by Jacobs company, the economics report, it's quite clear that the Finkel report has got things totally wrong. Basically, what we've seen is this increase, very rapid increase in electricity prices, especially over the past couple of years, which has been caused by the renewable energy target eventually biting. That target was quite small when it started off, 2% of energy, but it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. It's now 9%. And when it forces cheaper power stations, that is non-subsidised power stations, offline, and it forces them to actually operate in more expensive ways because they have to meet the ebbs and flows which is coming from wind power. The end product of this is that power stations close. We saw the northern power station close in South Australia a year or so ago. Very soon after that close, we had a disaster there where the state went black as a result of having no reliable power it could draw upon. We saw in Australia eventually the Hazelwood factory being forced to close. That's 20% of the capacity in Australia, in Victoria. That capacity having left the market, we saw then the prices suddenly double, the wholesale prices double. Government was obviously alarmed by this, and it's implemented or brought into play the Finkel inquiry. Finkel, instead of saying, well, you know, we have this problem with electricity through renewables, basically has doubled down. He said, okay, we're going to have even more renewables. And I mean, the logic of this defies any rationality. It's basically saying we have this more expensive power which we're forcing to substitute and take out of the market the less expensive power, that is coal power, and this somehow or other the prices are going to fall. It's jiggery-pokery, it's not intuitive, it's totally wrong. The prices will rise, they'll stay higher. It needn't be like this. I mean, Australia had just about the cheapest electricity in the world, even in about 2007, 2008. It's now just about the dearest electricity in the world. And it's all due to government policy, it's not due to anything else. And it can be the cheapest again. We have the most abundant coal supplies in the world, very cheap coal supplies in Queensland and here in Victoria. We can build new coal power stations for roughly $50 per megawatt hour. They can be operating there, they can make profits at $50 per megawatt hour, which is as cheap as anywhere in the world, and it contrasts with the $100 per megawatt hour that we have at the present time, that we'll have way into the future if these Finkel proposals are carried through. The implications of this for households, well, basically means $800 on a household bill, which is quite serious. And but even more serious, though, is the sorts of issues that on business, because the effects of these costs on business are amplified many times over. We can see it in the issues of fish and chip shops, but the big issue is that we have our major industries, energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries. We're talking about aluminium, we're talking about steel, we're talking about chemicals. These industries employ have about 20% of the secondary industry of Australia. They can't survive with the kind of price increases which are dictated by the policies that are proposed by the Finkel report. So we have to get out of this. The way to get out of it is to get rid of all the various regulations on energy, get rid of the renewable energy target, which is a subsidy to wind, about $75, get rid of the small scale one, which is a subsidy to rooftops, get rid of the $3 or $4 billion a year that governments are subsidising from the budgets to essentially to wind or to large scale solar. And in that way we can then return to the low cost electricity which we've enjoyed in the past, and which has been very significant in terms of the industry sector and our living standards. If we don't do that, we will see a fall in living standards, quite a dramatic one. Sorry? Report. And here's the report.
On behalf of all Australians, I'll accept that. Thank you very much, Dr. Moran.
Right.
And we're open for questions.
Dr. Moran, that figure of $768 extra a year, how did you come up with that figure?
It's basically by looking at what the price would be if we had coal-based power, which would be what it's been in the past, $45, $50, and what it is with wind-based power, which is what it is now. If you can look at the price of electricity in Victoria now is about $112 at this stage. There's no reason why it should be this high, except the fact that we have gotten rid of one of our more productive, low-cost power stations. So the difference is based on that. But in addition to that particular, there will be other costs. That is, because wind is more diffuse, it requires a different sort of network, and there are expenses there. These costs aren't included in there.
And different electronics to manage the lack of synchronous power in this kind of setup with intermittence. But what about, can you tell us about, I've read your report, you gave me a preliminary copy over the weekend, an excellent report, and it raises serious questions about the Jacobs modelling that Dr. Finkel's report relies upon. And they're really serious questions that it raises, because the Finkel review uses what seem to be invalid, certainly not explained, certainly not detailed assumptions, which lead me to the conclusion that the Finkel report is really a report for hire. The policy was dictated by the federal government, and I think the Finkel review has produced what the federal government wanted.
Well, that's true. The heart of the Finkel review is an assumption that we will see renewable energy falling in cost over the years. I've been in this industry about 35 years. There's always been one of these issues that 5 years in the future, these renewables are going to be cheaper than coal, oil, or gas. It's been like that for 35 years, and the Jacobs report, the Jacobs modelling Finkel is based on that continuing on. They say that by 2050, renewables will be only $30 a megawatt hour, much cheaper than coal. They say that, but there is no evidence that that's the case. And moreover, they don't follow that up by saying, therefore, let's get rid of all the renewable subsidies. So they don't have enough confidence to get rid of the renewable subsidies, but they say that renewables will be cheaper automatically. And I say if they're cheaper automatically, that's great. Let the best source of energy prevail. we shouldn't be forcing along one rather than another.
Weren't there three separate reports done by Jacobs, and they're contradicting each other?
Yes.
And they've been done relatively recently. And they contradict each other, and this is the basis of the Finkel review.
Isn't the real reason, though, that power prices have been going up so significantly in recent years that there's been a lack of certainty for business around where they should invest, whether they should invest in coal, whether they should invest in renewables? Doesn't what Alan Finkel's report is suggesting provide business with some certainty that they should put their money into renewables, and that in turn will lead to more renewables and help to drive down the price? Does your report look at, if that does happen and there are more renewables, what sort of effect that may have on household bills?
Yes, it does. It does look at that. I mean, people always talk about certainty. There's very little certainty with governments. Governments have intervened an awful lot in terms of the energy market. And indeed, the only certainty that we would get now, and this is the way for the future, is for the government to actually sign a contract for somebody who builds a coal-fired power station that they won't steal it. These contracts are quite common. Of course, we had one in Victoria here. We had one for roads where the Andrews government tried to break the contract and they had to pay on our behalf $1 billion compensation to the contractees. Now, so basically, Finkel is saying that if we have this certainty, people will invest in wind, and the wind price will fall anyway, and we'll all be hunky-dory. It just doesn't make any sense. The wind price won't fall that much. If it did, it would be great. But it won't. But if it did, it would be great. But what Finkel says is that because of the uncertainty, if you're going to invest in coal, you will need a 14.9% return on your investment before you can give it a go-ahead. Whereas if you invest in wind, it'll be 6.1%. That doesn't make any sense. The only reason why that might be the case is if the government has created this uncertainty, and it can uncreate this uncertainty by signing contracts.
There's no evidence that power prices will fall with more renewable energy, but where's the evidence that they'll rise?
Well, they've risen with the increase in renewable energy. They've risen, as we can see from the chart, they've risen quite a lot already.
And that's an assumption in your report that they'll continue to rise.
No,
if there is more.
It's an assumption in my report as we replace the price of gas, the price of renewables is, according to the Minister, Judge Frydenberg, is $90 odd. He says that in addition to that, we will need to get that security from renewables, which will cost another $14. So the price on his basis is about $110. That's the price that I've actually estimated the price to be a bit less than that for the market. So the current prices are based on a price of about $80 or $80. I think it will go to about $100, so it will go up a bit more. But we've seen already some big licks of increases. 20% increases were announced in South Australia the other week. Indeed, it's odd because the Finkel report came out and said the prices won't rise very much with our policies, and whatever we've seen is already happened. And then a week later, the prices shot up.
So James, coming back to your point on costs. There are three reasons why costs have increased dramatically for everyday users of electricity. The first is government regulation. The significant thing about this graph is that you can see regulation took off after 2004, 2006. That's when we last tinkered in a big way with the national electricity energy market, which, by the way, is not an energy market, it's a poverty racket, as you can see the consequences. So the government regulation. Government now, I think we've got more than 20 instruments, pieces of legislation, and more than 2,000 pages of regulations on governing it. This is not a market. This is a distortion. It's a rigged distortion. And they're trying to manage it, and they can't. It's beyond their control. The second reason we've got an increase in energy prices is because of poles and wires. We understand that, and we know there are distortions there. That's also due to government regulation. And the third one, and the big one in recent times, is, as Dr. Moran has pointed out, the intermittent energy that's been added. Now, that intermittent energy isn't just a reflection of the subsidies for these inherently higher costs of energy. It's also then the added costs of regulations to get around the inherent disadvantage of intermittence, because they are intermittent. They're asynchronous, and this causes enormous problems for what used to be a very stable, reliable, synchronous generation source. So we've got these hidden costs, the direct costs, and the regulatory costs, and the whole thing is a mess, and it needs to be sorted out. And that's why I wasn't exaggerating. It's it's well within the believable that we are facing a national emergency.
Dr. Moran, you've been a long-term opponent of renewable energy. How can people be confident that your report isn't biased?
I'm not really an opponent of renewable energy. I'm an opponent of subsidised energy, either renewable of any sort. I mean, and basically, the most efficient renewable or exotic renewable intermittent energy at the present time is wind. It's been around for a long time, and it's actually gotten more efficient over the years. But it's a mature energy. It's a mature technology. It will get better, but not much more. And we know that wind needs $100. In fact, Josh Frydenberg said it needs $114, $115 per megawatt hour, compared to where we were at $40 per megawatt hour just a few years ago on a coal-based system. If wind gets more efficient, then it'll get more efficient. But I see no evidence that it is going to see any dramatic decline in its price. We've not seen dramatic declines in its price for decades now. Who knows? Maybe it will. Maybe there will be some dramatic breakthrough. But if there is, then let it happen. Let it happen, and the price will fall. But I see no evidence of it, and I see a lot of evidence of the government actually intervening in the market to essentially kill off coal, to subsidise wind, in ways that will increase our prices.
Malcolm Roberts, this is the price people have to pay, $768 a year. If that is indeed the increase, is that the price that Australians have to pay to follow the rest of the world in cutting down pollution?
Can you tell me what you mean, James, by pollution?
Well, if you ignore the idea that there's global warming, say it's all made up, isn't it just something that people have to do? They have to pay more to reduce pollution, to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, carbon dioxide is the gas you're talking about. It's colourless, odourless, tasteless, and 97% of it every year is made by nature. It's not a pollutant. It's nowhere ever has it ever been called a pollutant. It is essential for all life on Earth, so it's not pollution. Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party is opposed to pollution. Sulphur dioxide, nitrous oxides, particulates. And no, we don't have to pay this price to remove carbon dioxide from our output. Carbon dioxide, we don't even control the level. The empirical evidence shows that we can't control the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's a function of temperature and ocean temperature. So we don't affect it. The rest of the world is not following us. China and India are saying they're business as usual until they get their economies up to speed, until they're industrialised. America has just said, no, thank you very much, we're pulling out of Paris. So we believe that what we need to do is best for Australia, and that is to abandon all of the climate change policies, all of the energy policies that are based on climate change. And I draw your attention, James, to the chief scientist, Dr. Finkel, and his response to questioning in Senate estimates last month. In response, the question was asked of Dr. Finkel, what impact would it have if Australia stopped? Australia contributes about 1.3% of the human production of carbon dioxide. What impact would it have if we stopped all of that altogether? And he said, virtually nothing. And he is right. The only word I disagree with is virtually. It would have no impact whatsoever because all of human production can't affect the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Our 1.3% of the 3% humans produce has no impact whatsoever.
Just following on from that previous question, Dr. Moran, as you were saying, most of the report is centred on coal as opposed to renewable sources of energy. But do you see any negatives of using coal? Like, I guess the price is one of them, but like, is that really the most important thing here?
Well, in terms of a competitive electricity industry, you know, we want it as cheap as possible. I mean, that's been the backbone, it caused the backbone of our industry. Australia has been very different from other developed countries insofar as we have in the past been a net exporter of energy-intensive goods, and that's because our electricity was cheaper. We've got coal, we've got lots of coal, which is actually fortuitously very clean coal, which is low in sulphur and things like that, whether it's the brown coal here in Victoria or the black coal in Queensland and New South Wales. So that's the heart of our electricity price, a coal-based system. Back in the early parts of this century, in 2004, 2005, about 87% of our electricity was generated by coal, and it's been brought down by the renewable requirements, which are present time at 9%, you know, there wouldn't be any renewable energy produced in Australia if it wasn't for subsidies. And nobody knows. Most people don't know that there's a subsidy. They're basically obliged to incorporate it within their energy supplies because of the government regulation, which then creates a subsidy for the renewables. So I don't see any downside in coal. It's extremely clean. The newer factories are, you know, there's one in Japan just in the middle of Yokohama Bay. Right now, it's a very clean substance. It doesn't emit very much in terms of the pollutants that Senator Roberts was talking about, sulfur dioxide and particulates, etc. I see no downside at all. It's just it's nature's bounty we've got here, and we learn how to mine it and how to feed it into power stations to the great benefit of our community.
And I'd go one step further, Holly. At the moment, in the last 170 years, from 1850 onwards, we've seen, thanks to coal and oil and gas, dramatic decreases in real terms and real prices of energy. And that has given us enormous prosperity, which has led to the wealth that has generated the ability to protect the environment. Now, what we're seeing right now is that our coal is being exported overseas, where it's generating electricity at cheaper prices than is generating here in this country because of all of our regulations and taxes. The clean energy target, which is Dr. Finkel's magic wand, is nothing more than a carbon tax. It is just a carbon tax applied at the retail level. So Julia Gillard was hammered for a carbon tax. Malcolm Turnbull needs to be hammered for a carbon tax. But when we export coal overseas at a cheaper price, generate electricity overseas more cheaply than we do it here, we also know that they use their own coal, sometimes dirty coal, and it produces sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides and particulates overseas. That increases global pollution, of real pollution, because we're shutting down our clean coal-fired power stations, we're shutting down our clean industries, and it's being replaced by overseas jobs. So not only are we losing the jobs, we're also increasing global pollution because of the old power stations that some of the Asians and Africans use. But there's just something else that's happening also at home. Energy these days is not a luxury, Holly. It is an essential good. And the people who are on low incomes are paying a lot more for electricity now. It is a highly regressive tax. The Greens and the ALP bleat on about looking after the poor. They don't give a damn about the poor. In this country or anywhere else in the world, they refuse to let exports out to develop India and the poor in India. They want to continue and increase the subsidies that are hitting the poorest in this country. And they want to create more unemployed. That's the reality. We are for low pollution, we are for high efficiency, and we are for high reliability and high security. That's what we need. We had all that in the 80s, we need to get back to it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for coming.